Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming here this Thursday afternoon. What I'm about to do in the next half an hour or so is talk you through some of my fairly recent ramblings through Eastern Europe. And Eastern Europe's got a bad reputation sometimes, grim, grey, dull Soviet architecture, rotting Soviet architecture, unfriendly people. And what I'll try and do is to reverse these myths and also show you some of the different things that you can see and do in these countries. The basis of the talk is what I actually did, and I did this in 3 or 4 bite-sized trips. But what I'll try and link them to are some of our trips, and this is not going to get too commercial on you, I promise, but so you can see actually what you can do with us as a company. And if you look at Eastern Europe, there is so much there. I'm blown away by it. I'm fond of many, many parts of the world. Turkey is probably one of my favourites. Out of the chat with somebody that travelled with me 30 years ago, more or less, in Turkey. But East European for me, it's a real revelation because it's only recently that I've started going there. And what I found was different from the stereotypes. Okay, a little bit about me. I started to explore in the early 80s, tour leading in Turkey and Central America, South America. Got married, decided leading 10 months a year wasn't good for a long-term marriage. Found a desk job and ended up at Explore 23 years ago in the office, and that's where I've been ever since. I look after everything we do overseas effectively. It's been great. It means I still travel. I still love to travel and get to some very strange places, and those are some of the places that I'll show you. For those of you that haven't travelled with us before, we've been operating 35 years. It's small group travel, maximum group size 16 or 18, 120 countries, anything from cultural trips to trekking trips to cycling, all sorts of stuff. But anyway, I'll let pictures paint what we do. And forgive my photography for 2 reasons. A, I'm a poor photographer, but the images are meant to represent what you can see out there. And secondly, the time of year I normally go are the times of year that people don't go, and that's when it's very grey and bleak. So try and put blue skies behind some of the photographs, because that's when we actually operate the trips. Kaliningrad to Chisinau, and the other thing is my pronunciation is not perfect as well, so nobody please pick me up on my pronunciation. Kaliningrad to Chisinau, where the hell are some of these places? So let's start off with Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is an exclave of Russia, separated from Russia, and it's a year-round ice-free port for the Russians to get to the sea. It's very Soviet. It was closed for many years, one of the closed cities, or one of the closed areas of the country. It's a revelation when you get there. You start off in Poland and then go into Russia, but I'll come to that in a minute. For the rest of the next 40 minutes, the journey will be thus: from Kaliningrad into Lithuania. Lithuania, think of a fairly quirky place, but a bit dull perhaps. Then into Belarus. I'll talk about the markets and the street art there and what you can see and do. And then an overnight train to Kiev, touch on Chernobyl in the north and some other places that you won't have heard of, Zitomir, and finally over to Moldova. And also we'll touch on Zupia, Transnistria and Gagauzia. Anybody been to any of those 3 places? You look a fairly well-travelled bunch. Got one, couple, 2 or 3, good, okay. I'm not quite sure if I'm preaching to converted here, but you can tell me your views of those places. They're very, very strange, unusual places. I'll just get out of the line of sight there. First of all, we've got a short break going to Kaliningrad. Starts off in Gdansk and then goes into Kaliningrad. The good thing about this trip is, although Russian visas can be a bit of a chore, you have to go to the embassy to get fingerprinted. With this trip, because you're there for less than a certain amount of time, you don't have to go through the rigours of getting a visa. So we start off in Gdansk, and I thought about Gdansk, I thought about steelworks, strikes, Lech Wałęsa, all those things. I turned up there and wow, look at that. The architecture is breathtaking. If you don't travel with us, just jump on a cheap flight and go and visit the place because it's great. And the Solidarity Museum is something well worth going to see as well. From there, we go to the border of Russia and pass by this place, this castle, biggest brick-built castle in Europe. I'm always a bit adverse to these superlatives, but it's huge. It's one of the castles of the Teutonic Knights. It's absolutely huge, and that gives you a bit of a taster before going into Kaliningrad proper, because Poland, it's advanced, good roads, decent railways, good infrastructure, and you go from there and you cross the border into Kaliningrad, and suddenly you've definitely crossed a frontier. Nowadays, well, in lots of places in Europe there are no frontiers. You just breeze over from Slovakia to wherever you're going. But here, going from Poland into Kaliningrad, it's night and day. It's very distinct because you go from modern Poland to what is, although it's Russia, it's a very Soviet form of Russia. Something quite exceptional. And you can flit from a place where you see nuclear submarines, massive bits of military hardware. This is one of the pods from Soyuz just sitting there in the museum that we visit downtown. And there you go into a cathedral. You go and see where Kant was buried. It's ugly in places, but it's totally distinct. You've got the street markets, wander around. It's a fascinating place. And I say, think about blue sky, because this is what it looks like with blue skies. A lot more attractive, perhaps not so atmospheric. Personally, I like to go there when things are grey and grisly. I think it puts it in its right context. We don't just stay in the capital. We go out to the coast and go to an amber mine, go to an amber museum, and also we take our group, typical explore style, we take them to a workers' canteen. Now, it's not the finest food on the planet, but you've got all the workers around you. There's a real sense of being somewhere rather than just looking at something. And you go into this amber museum. Amber is one of the biggest places on the earth for amber, and it's got some real rarities, and you can understand why they're rare. In fact, you can understand why the hell anybody would want them in the first place. So if you want to look at a Soviet icebreaker made out of amber, that's the place to go. You've got the CCP clock behind it. If you want a map of Russia made out of amber, you can do it. And I was there, I think, just about 2 years ago. And if you notice, say you've got the Far East, is this working? You've got the Far East there, but a recent embellishment, if you just look here at the Crimea, where they'd added the amber after recent events. And of course that area is still held by Russia. Always be suspicious of tour operators and superlatives, always be suspicious. Sometimes you read things and you think, God, that sounds fantastic. And you get there and you're so damn underwhelmed about the place. And I'm about to show you one of those places, and I think we talk about it on our trip notes. And it is the Twisted Forest on the Curonian Peninsula. I'll talk about the Curonian Peninsula a little bit, but the Twisted Forest, and the guide was very excited. This is a one-off place in the world. It's amazing. It's a highlight of people's visits to Kaliningrad. And here it is. There we go. Now, perhaps that was just a ploy, because anything you see after that, you're going to be excited about, frankly. And if you look at the Curonian Peninsula, it links Kaliningrad with Lithuania. And this is a shot from the air, obviously. But it's a sandbar with wonderful green forest on it. It's a nature reserve. It really is so different from the grey concrete drabness of Kaliningrad town centre. We use local trains as well to get out there and back. We go to a beach resort, we see the locals relaxing at the weekend. And those of you that have been to the Skeleton Coast in Namibia may recognise this. Well, you won't, because this is the spit that I was talking about. It's massive. These aren't just a few feet high. It's expansive. If you look just there, those are people on the edge of it. So you've gone from some post-industrial wasteland almost into this amazing reserve where you feel like you're on the edge of the Atlantic. Wonderful place. Crossing over, just before you get into Lithuania, anybody guess what this is? Now, I said this is going to be a bit quirky, this presentation. Any guesses? Petrol is very cheap in Kaliningrad. It's heavily subsidised. And what this is at a petrol station, and the vans go on this, they tilt the vehicle a little bit, and that allows people to get that extra little bit of petrol into the petrol tank. Fantastic, so practical, so practical. Anyway, again, that's probably not most people's highlights, but I just love that kind of stuff. Into Lithuania. If you want to have a 2-week trip, including Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, ending in Krakow and Poland. We've got that trip. If you want a 1-week trip from Vilnius in Lithuania to Minsk, we've got that as well. Or a 1-week trip from Minsk to Krakow, we have that too. So these are some of the things that I saw on the way. And a place called Grutas, you see there, Grutas Park. Right up there, I can't pronounce the name of the place. This is an interesting place. What happened was after 1990, when Lithuania broke away from the Soviet Union, it had all these statues of people that they didn't like anymore, or things referring to the Soviet past that they want to get rid of. And a very, very astute businessman, what he did was he didn't charge anything, but he said to the mayors, look, I'll take these statues away from you. You don't want them. Oh, thank God for that. And he took all these statues to this park. And there's probably about 100 of these things. And you've got Lenins, you've got Stalins. And, okay, that looks mildly impressive, but this is the scale of them. What a businessman, what foresight to think of doing that. And it's an excellent example of Soviet sculpture art, if you're into that kind of thing. I like surprises, and when I travel, whoever's taking me, I say, surprise me, surprise me. Sometimes life is not about happy or pleasant surprises, sometimes it's quite unpleasant, but you have the memories and you reflect on them. So this is one of the less pleasant culinary memories I had when I said surprise me. It's a pig's ear. It's a very common dish in Lithuania. It's worth trying once only, but it's this kind of stuff that you can experiment with. Other odd things, and this is another bit of dodgy photography for me, this is the soups. They're mad about the forests in Lithuania, absolutely crazy. And they go out and forage, and they have the best mushroom soup I think you can find anywhere. And what they do is they make the bowl out of local bread as well. Very, very tasty. Make sure you ask your leader to have a try. Other surprises. This is a nuclear bunker between the coast and the capital, Vilnius. It's exactly as it was. And you go in, you've got the silos there, and you've got the history of the Cold War. And it was in here that they armed the rockets for the Cuba Missile Crisis. And this is something which I think is a copy, but on top left-hand there, you've got Cuba. Secret. I mean, it can't be that secret. I'm not quite sure why it's written in English as well, if it's secret. But it gives you a taster of it, and you feel in a different world altogether. 1990, the separation. And this is from the television tower in Vilnius. You know, television towers are television towers. Has anybody been to Vilnius? Quite a few. You go down there, you've got, buildings that are 100 years old, all a bit quaint, cobble streets, but underwhelming for me, at least. But you go out, and you go up the television tower, and you see where it's positioned in the forest. You also see the old Soviet housing estates, mini-cities in themselves from above. And also it's a very important part of the separation from Lithuania and the Soviet Union. And it's got a great, great selection of photographs. So it's not that long ago, 26 years ago, when there were tanks on the streets and fighting, and then the subsequent separation. Odd bits of Vilnius is the self-declared Republic of Uzupio. Now, I said about those dull bent trees, and breakaway republics sound very interesting. They can be, but this is one possibly to avoid. Yes, it was interesting once, and you go down there, it used to be full of hippies and esoteric types, squatters, and it really was different in those days. But gentrification happens, they've been moved out, people have bought the old houses, and now it's been tarted up. So its reputation that it once had has diminished, but it's an interesting place to go. They've got a written constitution on the wall about the right of dogs, having the right to be dogs. Very unusual, but for about 5 minutes of your life. Don't build up your expectations. Grey, monolithic architecture, car parks. They tried to do something about it in Lithuania. And I saw this before I left the UK. I thought, I've got to go there. Isn't that wonderful? It looks like Agua Azul in Mexico. And you just sit there, and it just brightens the whole place up. And this is going to be the theme of the next 20 minutes or so now, of those things that I found colourful and different, that show a different aspect of life in these countries. Talked about Stalin, talked about Lenin, their statues, grey statues. How about this at the main railway station in Lithuania? Why? God knows. What does it mean? Don't know. But you just look at it and you think, what brilliance, what mind thought about putting a massive statue of a giant propping up the canopy there. Jumping on the train, fast modern trains, Belarus is our next stop. And Belarus, it's a very controlled country. I think I'm safe in saying that. And there's a couple of jokes. One is, what's the difference between Israel and Belarus? And the answer is there have been more presidents of Israel born in Belarus than born in Belarus. I'll explain that for you. There's only ever been one president there, Lukashenko, something like that. And in Israel, 3 of their presidents have been actually born in Belarus. So it's the longest uninterrupted rule of any country in Europe. Very Soviet, very controlled, very clean, very tidy, absolutely no graffiti. Just remember that, absolutely no graffiti. One joke goes around, you've got a Pole goes and sits on a seat and it's got a safety pin, he jumps up and goes, ouch, oh! And a Lithuanian sits on a seat on a drawing pin, sits down, immediately jumps up. Belarusian guy sits down on a seat and doesn't do anything. And the guy says, why are you doing that? He said, it hurt a bit at the beginning, but I got used to it. Now, if you use that to life there, right now, there's a certain resonance for me. I had some very entertaining conversations about democracy. What was the difference between Theresa May, the Queen, and President Lukashenko? The answer is President Lukashenko was voted for. Now, very controlled, and you have to get a visa, sadly. It makes it a bit more painful to get into, but this is the kind of stuff that you see. This is kind of classic Soviet Union type territory. Empty plazas, monumental buildings, statues from the past, very nice people, very warm people. We're their 3rd largest trading partner in the world. That might increase in a couple of years when we're desperate to trade with other people. Who knows? Tractor factories abound, or a whole part of the city, in fact, is a tractor factory. Remember, no graffiti at all. In the marketplaces, there's the first thing that strikes you is how clean it is. Also, Christianity, all the symbols of Orthodox Christianity all around the place, and how incredibly monocultural, how incredibly white the country is. It's bizarre when you've come from Britain or other parts of Europe. And that's the indoor market, completely controlled. They're incredibly tight on food hygiene after Chernobyl, because a cloud of radiation came over from Ukraine into Belarus, and after that they implemented very stringent food hygiene. You go there, you can taste the food, it's a wonderful experience, and markets I always love, and it's a living, vibrant place. In the old days, the star employees of the month, there they go, used to be changed every month. You have them outside the factories and buildings. You still have them there in Belarus. And I said about no graffiti, well, when the president wants something done, he does it in style. Look at the graffiti on the top there. You've got the trees, you've got something called Usica Brazil, I think. He paid somebody to come from Brazil, and he did the most incredible wall murals I've seen anywhere. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Latin America, and I love the murals there, in Iran too. But in Minsk, of all places, did I expect to see wall murals of this magnitude? There we go, got old Lenin there. This is the size of it, except it's a whole street. And it's all like Mayan glyphs, speech glyphs that you see in places like Palenque in Mexico, coming out of the animals. It's contrast, like Poland and Kaliningrad. You go from one thing to another. Here it's the same. You have your grey buildings and statues in your head, but you're bombarded by this colour. But then you do have to go back to stereotypes sometime. This is the tractor factory in Minsk. They've built 3 million of these things since it started. Everywhere you go in Minsk, you see them. They clean the rubbish up, and it's a whole town of about 7,000 people. And again, you can go and visit it. You can go into the canteen. They're very proud of the food there. 3D image of what you get. Basic stuff, but you feel as if you're part of the place rather than just viewing it from a window. The other thing to think about is what happened to these countries in the Second World War. Now, these statistics are ambiguous and argued about, so let's just take what I say as being the truth, even though it might not be the complete truth. But during the Second World War, something like 2 million people were killed in Belarus. That's about a quarter of the population. That figure is disputed, but a huge number of people were killed, and that's the same in Ukraine. And of course, you had the tragedies of the famines in Ukraine in post-World War II periods. But what they have is this culture of inward strength, of protecting their area, and this is the museum to the people that died in the Great War, World War II, as we call it. It's a staggering building. I think it has to be one of the most moving museums I've been to. And just simple murals inside. I say it's simple, this is huge. So you've got all the warriors all around there, and then you've got a picture of one of the last World War II veterans there. So the point is for the people of today to protect the citizens and to pay homage to the people that fought and died in World War II. This is another part of the museum. So it's a must-see as far as I'm concerned if you're ever in Minsk. Getting around, the roads are very good. Also, trains in this part of the world are brilliant. Here's a picture, a manicured of my untidy overnight sleeper, but they leave on time, they arrive on time. You've got somebody coming around with a beer or a cup of tea in the morning, clean and tidy, overnight, and wallop, you wake up and you walk out the door and you're in Kiev, or wherever it might be. I think there's nothing finer in the world than waking up somewhere totally different in the morning. So we use these trains on many of our trips. Not many pictures of churches on this talk this afternoon. I'm not particularly a church person, but as somebody that's not particularly interested in churches, actually, in Kiev, they're magnificent. I mean, this is the Lavra monastery here. It's centuries old. Gilded paintings, there's catacombs. Anybody would be fascinated. And over there on the right-hand side is the cathedral in Zhytomyr, a place that you won't have heard of, but it's the birthplace of Soviet space technology. And with Orthodox churches and cathedrals, there are no seats. You just go in there and stand. And although I'm not a religious person, to go in and listen to people singing or praying, and you smell the incense, you feel transported elsewhere. So as you're wandering about these places, do go into the churches and just reflect and meditate a little bit. Kiev for me has to be, let's compare Kiev and Moscow for a second. I won't go into what Moscow is like. All I'll say is Kiev is far more interesting scenically and what you'll see there. There's the main area. Modern in the distance. There's the Soviet areas. This is a statue to commemorate the war dead. If you look very closely, you'll see the tip of that sword is chopped off at the top. That was because it's not allowed to be higher than the monastery of the previous picture that you saw. And around it, it's World War II Museum. You've got all the tanks in the period. You've got statues there, bottom right, can't quite see them, of the fighters that died in the millions in Ukraine. And this is the downtown area. This is where the revolution started 2 years ago. I was in Kiev just 2 months ago, and I believe that it's a fascinating place to wander around. You'll see mementos of what happened in the square, little shrines of the fallen protesters. If you're interested in modern geopolitics, it's a place where it's really quite raw and in your face. The Tunnel of Love. This is an old railway line that connects a place that you won't have heard to a place on the outskirts of it, which is a factory. As trains trundle round 3 or 4 times a day, but during the day you can walk along the track, and that's what our groups do. And this is where couples go to get engaged. So you've got wasteland around you, but you've got this wonderful green corridor leading to the factory. You see some real oddities, and for no particular reason, I just love this. The rocking centre of Kiev, and wandering around, you've got bikers doing heavy metal, you've got folk music, you've got all sorts, all pedestrian at night. You walk back and forth, back and forth. You've got small bars, microbreweries, great food, fantastic food. And here we go. It's not just kind of drinking vodka out of a plastic bottle. Actually, they do some really tasty stuff. And sometimes it is out of a plastic bottle. I mean, this was a bit more refined. But my adage of, surprised me, well, it did surprise me. It's something called horseradish vodka. I'm not quite sure what it's called. And you smell it, and it smells of horseradish, and you taste it. It just burns your throat in a very nice way, and you have that taste for the next kind of 3 or 4 hours. With food, it's very cheap, exceptionally good value, very good quality. If you're a meat eater, it's fantastic. If you're a vegetarian, South India is probably a bit better, but the quality is good and very good value. You can enjoy yourself at very reasonable prices. I was talking about modern situation out there with the Russians occupying part of the East, and this is what I saw at the airport. It's a sort of Van Gogh painting at the top there. And what they've done is got hold of old masters, and then the photographer has caught people in similar poses. Things like that just bring it home to you, makes what's happening in the country real. And what the Soviets tried to do was, with the paintings on the wall, with the murals, to promote political messages. And this is one at Chernobyl. You can see it's overgrown. I've been to Chernobyl a couple of times now, and I revisited it again a couple of months ago. Chernobyl, you've got the history behind it. I mean, I grew up in North Wales in the 80s when 30 years ago when it happened. I remember you couldn't eat any of the sheep from the hills because of the radiation that drifted over to the UK. But it has left a pocket. It's almost a national park. You go through 3 exclusion zones to get to the heart. You're escorted by a guide that knows where the hot spots are. You're checked with Geiger counters when you leave. It's totally safe. It's no more dangerous, or you get no more radiation than being on a plane at altitude for about 8 hours. And it's the way nature's reclaimed the area. It's not just the building. I mean, this place is a city of 49,000 people that had to be abandoned overnight. And slowly now, nature is taking it back. And also in this area, because there's an exclusion zone, you have all kinds of wild animals there. They're safe, they're not being hunted. And you have a few people, quite old people, that have gone in there or never actually left when everybody else was evacuated. But the human piece that people forget, the people that died, those brave fighters that went in to try to stop the fire in the main reactor. And I'm going to go back to this picture, because this is the town where all the workers lived. And if you look just there, see that? That's reactor 4 that blew. That's how close it was. And if you look at this arch building there, it's one of the largest structures of its kind on the planet, and that was slid over reactor 4 just about a month ago to contain it should there be any further leakages. Excuse me for a second, just whilst I check the time. Okay, moving on. Zitomir. After being to Chernobyl, got to this place 5 o'clock, rotting concrete, grey skies, what have I let myself into? Went to the door with the guide, they opened it up, and I was met by a wall of synth, spacey, trippy, hippie music. Quite remarkable. There we go, at the bottom there. Lights flickering back and forth, and it's got the relics of the Soviet space industry there. It's got, again, Soyuz capsules that were retrieved. It's a homage to the Soviets and the space race. It's otherworldly. And this place, Zitomir, it is a university town, and it's the small detail. This was outside the Institute of Music, so it's quite large, this, and it's filled with plants, or this little bit of detail outside a cafe. So amongst the old architecture, the bland architecture, you could say, which is striking in its own way, are these pockets of intense colour that you see, and it makes it all the more powerful, for me at least. Travelling with Explore, we want to get you out of the towns as well, get you into the countryside. Small groups, you can wander around the parks, chat to people, have a drink. You're not in a big group of 30, not in a big coach. And every now and again we have something quite exceptional, these strange one-off trips. There could be one-off festivals, or there could be a one-off trip that we want to try and polish it and then go to market with it. So what we have coming out in the next month or so, if you've been intrigued at all about Ukraine, is a 2-week pure Ukraine trip, which will cover the whole country. Yes, we go to Chernobyl at the moment. Yes, we go to elements of the north, but this will be a whole country 2-week trip, and it will be excellent value too, but more on that on our website in the coming weeks. On to Moldova and Chisinau. There we go. You're into the old architecture, that's what you have. There's a great contrast in the former Soviet cities where you have these walls and blocks of buildings, but abruptly the countryside starts just like that. And as you approach this, as you drive into Chisinau, it's almost a biblical wall ahead of you, and you're going through the space between this narrow white canyon that takes you into the heart of the city. But it's what's underground that's great. This is Krikover wine cellars. It's like Las Vegas on acid. It's most bizarre. It's tasteless. It's overwhelming. Yuri Gagarin went down there after he came back from space and went on a 2-day bender. You have to get driven around there. It's so large. It's huge. And then you have little stashes of famous people. This is Putin's wine stash. It's there collecting dust. I didn't like the Moldovans because they started to want to trade with Europe, and he imposed an embargo on all their exports. Moldova is a major wine exporter, it's major industry, and that decimated that industry. They had to find alternative markets. Gagauzia, anybody been to Gagauzia? Good, don't go there, don't. The reason I went there is because there's a community of ethnic Christian Turks there, and I speak Turkish badly, and I'm fascinated by the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. We don't go this on any of our trips at all. That's about as good as it gets. What's great is when you go there, it's no longer the Roman alphabet, and they don't speak Moldovan. They speak Russian or Turkish, and everything is in Cyrillic. So interesting if you're into Turkishness. More interesting for the average traveller, perhaps, or the sensible traveller, is Transnistria. Transnistria is a sliver of land. It's one of those frozen conflicts where it's part of Moldova, yes, but it has its own currency, it has its own police force, people speak Russian, everything's in Cyrillic. It's effectively an independent state, and it's got quite a large Russian division there. You go there, and if Moldova or Minsk seems like from another era, this is even beyond that. I mean, they carried on the Soviet Union actually after the Soviet Union collapsed. And, sorry, forgive me there. On that left-hand side, it's typical Soviet man, CCCP there on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, it's called Benderi Fortress. It was designed by Sinan, the architect, who he designed the Suleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. And you have this contrast of the semi-derelict factories in this area. You've got this wonderful Ottoman fort. That's the outsides of it, very well preserved. And then you've got a military base to the left-hand side. And you can just see a little radio van there. And a bit further along, I didn't like to take photographs, that's where all the tanks are kept. In the capital of this breakaway republic, Tiraspol, this is commonplace everywhere. If Ukraine is a little grubby around the edges on occasions, if Minsk is crisp and clean, this is the same case with Transnistria. They're people that want to be part of Russia and not part of Moldova. They don't treat themselves as being ethnic Moldovans, they treat themselves as Russians, or actually Soviets, even though there's no such thing as the Soviet Union. And this is a great one. It's almost like Superman pose if he'd only put his hand out. You have the flags with the sickles on, ham and sickle. This is the main drag of Tiraspol, the capital, almost bare of any transport at all. And you do see examples, even in Moldova, of what it was like in the old days. And this is as I was driving out of the country. And this is one of the observation posts on the outskirts of town, where people used to be checked going in and going out. Now it's a cafe. Right, almost there now on our journey. Although we stay in Minsk, although we stay in Chisinau, the capital of Moldova proper, we visit Transnistria, the place that we've just seen, but also we stay outside the capital. And this is one of the places that if you've never heard of before, as I'd never heard of, Ohyul Vechi, you think, what is this? And you read monastery and gorge. And what we do is stay in this tiny little place, and it's got the most impressive monastery there on a ridge. You can walk in the village. We stay in the village. This is typical of where we stay and where we eat and where the locals come out at the weekends. And I'm a great Black Sabbath fan. I saw them a couple of days ago on their last tour, and I love crosses. And this is the place. You're in a different world. And we just walk along the top there, you go into the catacombs, you've got the incense, you've got all the old icons. You compare that to modern day Chisinau, and you're out there, totally different. So forgive me for my meanderings, my tangential outbursts and what is a fairly personal journey. What I can say is there's an awful lot to Eastern Europe to amuse, entertain and educate practically anybody. It's not about Soviet architecture or just Soviet architecture. There's a lot more lovely people, decent food and some real oddities that will stay in your mind for the rest of your life. So thank you very much. I'm not quite sure how much time. Excuse me. How much more time is there?
Well, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. If anybody wants to go now, don't be polite, but if anybody has any questions, I'll stay here for the next 10 minutes. So thank you for listening, and we've got to stand somewhere over there.